Good morning, everybody. Summer has arrived, if you haven't noticed. And I noticed because my air conditioning went off. Perfect. Anyway, we manage, as my husband says, it's like the old days. Fans, window fans, attic fans, not so bad. Only when the sheets get sticky, that's not so great. But you know what? This will end. The new stuff is coming soon. But that's not the topic today. The topic today is Larchmont. When the summer comes, the living is easy in these shore communities, certainly our community. And today we're going to depart from our customary serious scrutiny of issues. And this is serious. Okay. We're going to depart from the type of issues that we scrutinize. And we're going to look at Larchmont of yesteryear. And I'm going to hand the meeting over to Jeff.
Good morning, everybody. This is what I call the grand tidbit. As you recall, we had a similar program for the village of Mamaroneck where we had Joe Germano and et cetera. And then we had a program on the unincorporated section with Valerie O'Keefe, et cetera. And now we're going to talk about bucolic Larchmont, that mile square. And this is very official. So I do want to read a poem. I know a village. You all will recognize this. I know a village facing toward water less sullen than the seas, where flickers get their bed and board, and all the streets are named for trees. The streets are named for trees. They edge past random houses safely fenced with paling or privet hedge that bicycles can lean against. And when the roots of maples heave the solid pavements up that bound them, strollers on sidewalks give them leave to thrust and pick a way around them. The little boats in harbor wear sails wider than a summer wedding. One fountain splashes in a square. In winter, there's a hill for sledding. While through October afternoons, horse chestnuts dribble on the grass, prized above diamonds or doubloons by miser children shrill from class. I know a village full of bees and gardens lit by cana torches, where all the streets are named for trees and people visit on their porches. It looks haphazard to the shore. Brown flickers build there, and I'd not willing, I think, exchange it for Arcadia or Camelot. This is a poem by Mrs. Charles Hayden. Now, Elaine's going, I know who that is. Mrs. Charles Hayden was a neighbor of mine growing up, and I knew her daughters Julie and Patsy, and it's Phyllis McKinley. So this is a program, and forget that this little place was bought from John Richbell and sold to Peter J. Monroe, who built the Monroe House, who had the Horseshoe Harbor as a little boathouse of his and a backyard that went to the Sound. And forget Thompson Flint, who created Manor Park and the mermaid in Fountain Square named Helena or Helena, however you wish to pronounce it. And that Horseshoe Harbor Yacht Club was Monroe's boathouse, then Union Church on the Sundays, and Larchmont Yacht Club on the other days. So this is none of that. This is down memory lane. This is what was it like? And I think it's important to show how things have changed over our lifetime before we all forget it. And it may help what we think of Larchmont in the future. So I searched around and I found a few folks. On my left is, I feel that you have to have people who were born here and who were raised here, who rode bikes here, who went to school here. But to give a true flavor, you have to have an outsider. And that is John Farris on my left. You all know him. And John is an outsider because he grew up in the unincorporated area. You know, he's one of those Murray Avenue kids, you know. And then on my right is another fellow who grew up here. He's a little different age group. Grew up on Went Avenue, trustee Bubba Finelli. And then I was riding around in a pickup truck a couple weekends ago, and I was thinking, because I tried to get Emmy Lou Sleeper, who unfortunately is in Vermont. Jim Whittemore is on some boat in Europe, you know, and et cetera. And then it dawned on me, who better than my own brother, Bruce Megan, who was known to, you know, Malcolm and so on. He's in the food pantry. That's where he spends most of his time. And he has a little different perspective because we're 2.5 years apart. So maybe there's a little difference there. So I thought maybe we'll go to John Ferris first from an outsider's point of view. And believe me, this is a free-flowing, you know, we're going to talk about schools, we're going to talk about bars, the Bevan, yeah, not bars to entry, but bars to drink. Okay, John, here you are. Give a little background about yourself.
Thanks a lot, Jeff. I don't know if you want any background about me, but you know, it dawned on me that Jeff asked the four of us to participate today. Between the group of us who are 300 years old, I don't know how we're going to remember anything. I thought I'd tell you a quick story having nothing to do with Larchmont. Is that okay? There's two little kids and they're out in the backyard of their mom's house, and one kid's 6 years old and one kid's 4 years old. And the 6-year-old says to the 4-year-old, you know, when we go back in to the house, let's use a couple of swear words. I'll use hell, and you use damn. So they go back in, and the mother says to the 6-year-old, he says, what do you want for breakfast? He says, oh, hell, Mom, I'll have Cheerios. And the mother slaps the kid and chases him up to his room and locks him in his room, and he goes back down to the 4-year-old, and she says, now, what do you want for breakfast? He says, I don't know, Mom, but damn sure it's not going to be Cheerios. What I started to think about, and Jeff said very quickly that I went to Murray Avenue School. I'm really sorry that Valerie isn't here because we went to Murray Avenue School together. And she was every bit as smart and wonderful as she is today. And I was going to tell you all that she used to chase me around Murray Avenue School, and I used to have to hide in the boys' room. That's not a joke. That's the truth. I started to think, and you guys can add to it if you'd like, but I tried to think of businesses that have been here since I was a little kid. My parents joined the Larchmont Yacht Club in 1943, so I've been going to Larchmont Yacht Club since I was a little teeny kid. And one of the biggest changes, and I'm jumping ahead of myself here before I go into these businesses, I think one of the biggest changes in our community is that those were the days that you could a 10 or 12-year-old could get on his bike from Murray Avenue School area, ride down to the Larchmont Yacht Club, go to the yacht club for the day, have 10 cents in his pocket in case he had to call home, and get home for dinner. There were no cell phones. There was no communication at all. My mother knew I was at the pool at the Larchmont Yacht Club. I mean, it's just amazing. Now you don't let your kid walk more than a couple of blocks, which I think is an amazing change for all of us. I remember it the old way. You can, in this morning too, I think that we want folks to add in to the list of things. If we come up with something and you think of something, let us know. But I went through in my head trying to think of businesses that have been here since I was a little kid. And that's in the 40s and growing up in the 50s. But I came up with Fox Funeral Home. Now, this is Larchmont-Mamaroneck, and so it's on the borderline. It's probably the oldest business in our community, and that's Walter's Hot Dog Stand. Does anybody know how many years Walter's Hot Dog Stand has been there? That's 89 years. Started by Gene's grandfather. Leon's Taxi has been here since I was a little kid. Leon's Taxi. Patsy's Garage on 5th Avenue. It's still a gas station, has been there since I was a little kid. Where I spent most of my youth, Larchmont Tavern. The drinking age was 18. Does anybody know how many years the Brunos owned the Larchmont Tavern?
Since 1933.
70 years, that's right. 72 years. That's right. The corner store was there. Foley's Hardware, owned by the Merrill family. Futterman's Stationery Store has been there for probably 70 years. Embassy Cleaners has been there. Now it's closed, but I've got it on the list anyway because I spent a lot of time there when I was a little kid, Larchmont Theater. It's just closed, but was there, I think I was going to Larchmont Theater in probably 1946 or 47 when I was a little kid.
It was 15 cents.
It was, yeah. And you can go next door to, it was an ice cream store right next door. I forget the name of it, and you could have a ice cream for I think 20 cents or something. Larchmont Diner. There was a gas station. It was a Texaco station across the street from the Larchmont Diner. And what was the name of that?
The owner was a fellow named Saul Press. He was the
Saul-
original owner, and he actually came to my wedding.
Okay, I'm going to give the mic to Jeff in a second. Two more older businesses, and I'm going to ask you how many years you think. Tony's Nursery and Larchmont Nursery next to each other. Okay. Does anybody know how many years they've been there? 88 years. I mean, it's just absolutely incredible. Does anybody know what preceded the McDonald's across the street here? Except for Jeff? And except for Bruce? There was a miniature golf. You got very close because right next door, what was right next door? Cook's. That's right. Now, if you went next to Cook's, where Petco is, what was that?
Bernadette.
No, it was Castro convertible. And where
Her as a little girl pulling up.
and where did the Castros live? Edgewater Point. I know the house very well that they used to live in. Now this is Mamaroneck again, but when we were growing up, there was no middle school. There was Mamaroneck Junior High School on the Boston Post Road, and Mamaroneck Senior High School on Palmer Avenue. Next to Castro Convertible, and down the street there was which is now Dunkin' Donut. There was a place called Tummy's Delight. Tummy's Delight was much the same as a Dunkin' Donut, and I worked there as a teenager. And on Friday and Saturday nights, I worked there. And my parents were so afraid of me working at a place till 12 o'clock at night. My mother and father waited in the finest parking lot across the street until 12 o'clock. And then I used to wave goodbye to them and go to the LT.
Different kind of beverage.
Different kind of beverages, right. The drinking age was 18. I was 18 as a senior in high school. And I wasn't going to bring this up, but I was a year behind everybody else. I had polio as a little kid, and thank God it was a polio virus, but I was left back in the second grade. So I was supposed to be the class of 59. Jeff was the class of 57. As you can tell, he's a lot older than we are. Okay.
My turn is yet to come.
Next to what was the Foot Locker and all that area? Does anybody know the restaurant that was right next to the high school to the left-hand side?
No. The ranch.
No. Robards. Attaboy. And I didn't call him. Okay, does anybody know what preceded the Gap? Horry Chevrolet. Okay, very good. That's very good. Across the street where the bank is right now. This is a hard one. Can you tell me what was there in the 60s and 70s? No, way back. Way back.
KFC.
No. No, KAC was further up. There, believe it or not, there was Larchmont. It was Larchmont Dodge Plymouth, because my dad bought his cars there. I don't know if anybody remembers, but where the Summit PT is, which is down another couple of blocks, right? That was a wonderful restaurant. What was the name of it? Coach and Four. That's right. That's right. Okay, I'm gonna go quick here. If you went down Murray Avenue, and I'm talking probably in the 70s, before you got to Larchmont Acres, there was a stationery store owned by Leon of Leon's Taxi. And I used to go down there early on Sunday mornings and help him put together the New York Times. When you got to where it's now a traffic light, there was no traffic light. There was a circle on Murray and Chatsworth. And there was a circle there, and I remember a little police hut, and you had to drive around the circle and take a left to go up on to Chatsworth Avenue. Now on the right-hand side was a little shack, and it was called Blind Joe's. That's right. Very good. Very good. Jeff wanted me to mention for some reason that my first car that I bought on a mobile station in Larchmont was a 1946 Plymouth that I paid $65 for. So when I took my son Chris for his first pair of Nikes, which was $85, I told him, you know, Chris, your shoes cost more than my first car. The kid looked at me aghast. Do you guys want to talk about the bars and the Bevan and all that kind of stuff?
Sure.
Okay, I'm going to let Bruce handle all that, and I'm going to come back to you because I've got some other stuff that might be of interest. But I'm going to turn this over to Bruce.
Good morning, everybody. Yeah, bars I knew something about, but there was, forget, Jeff. Can you hear me now? Okay. Okay. So I'm trying to remember the name of the bar that was on the post road near Hughes Drugstore. You know where our Moynihan's. It was something before that even.
No.
But it was always a watering hole of sorts. Water and other things, which reminds me, switching away from bars for a little bit, there was also a drugstore there called Hughes Drugs, Old Doc Hughes. And I remember one time walking from where we lived down on Hazel Lane, walking to Chatsworth School, and I tripped and fell on the sidewalk because the two pieces of thing were a little uneven. I didn't sue though. Yeah, right. But anyway, so I kind of scraped myself up pretty good, and I walked over to Hughes, and they fixed me up, you know, Band-Aids and antiseptic of some sort, and that you wouldn't see these days, that's for sure. So the other drugstore was Larchmont Pharmacy on the corner of Chatsworth and the Post Road, which is now Houlihan Lawrence. Yep, that 5 drugstores, right? Amazing. Well, we still got 5 drugstores, but they're all CVS, with the exception of one.
Anybody know what CVS stands for? Consumer Value Stores. They ought to change it to Consumer Rip-Off Stores.
Well, we could probably come up with something creative for that V. They wouldn't have to change the signs. So anyway, but back to bars. Of course, John mentioned the LT, and then down in the Manor, we had the old Bevan Hotel. That hotel goes back to 1880s, would you say?
Probably, yeah.
Yeah. And it changed hands over the years, and then it was made a little bit smaller, and I think there was some senior housing in there at one point. People basically like an SRO. And but down in the basement on that side street there was a bar, and it was a big hangout for us folks growing up. But all of the neighbors really got up into arms, and
Is that true, Elaine?
yes.
That's why Jane Orion got her house so cheap, because it was an SRO at that time.
Right. Right. Amazing, yeah. And then the Manor Inn was the other SRO, and it's too bad to have seen that go, because that really gave senior folks who still had family here in Larchmont a chance to live close by. And I think our grandfather on our mother's side, Jeff, would stay there occasionally when they came up from Laurel, Mississippi, which kind of reminds me also, our grandfather was a patent lawyer. This is on my mother's side, and he was quite some kind of a character, and he actually worked. Possibly, yes. Well, I know I had the same hairline that he had.
That's a big brain.
Thanks, Bubba. We got to stick together on that one. So, but our grandfather was, on my mother's side, was a patent lawyer, and he worked for T.A. Edison in Menlo Park. And somehow they moved to Larchmont at some point, and then one of the other patent lawyers that he worked with there was a fellow named Mason, who founded Masonite. And so their factory and offices were down in Laurel, Mississippi. And so my grandfather moved to Laurel, Mississippi. But while he was here in Larchmont, he built this stone house on Shadow Lane that's up on a hill. The house is still there, but it is has an address of.
Rockwood Drive. I worked there for 25 years.
My goodness.
Got some gift
Yeah, and I saw
Ah, and you sold it, right?
And Lynn Harrell grew up in that house, the cellist.
Oh, really?
And
Yes.
his father was a famous bass singer.
Right. Well, when they built, when my grandfather built it, my mother was a dance teacher, and was partners with a young lady by the name of Helen Adams.
Oh, yeah, Honey Adams.
Honey Adams. Right.
All went together.
So my grandfather built this big room on the ground level of that house, and she used to teach dancing there. Now, I have actually never been in the house, surprisingly, because my grandfather sold it in 1941, and unfortunately I wasn't born until 1942. So, just a youngster, yes. So, but anyway, and I remember when he listed the house to sell it, he had he took an ad in the newspaper, and it was I don't know if we ever had that or not, but it was in like a poem. how he was going to Laurel, Mississippi, and he needed to sell this house. And as I say, it's been so many years I don't remember what was said. Anyway, so I guess back to bars. The other thing, with I guess the big hangout was the LT. So a couple of other little tidbits.
Let me tell you one thing. This is a killer. The drinking age in the state of New York was 18. I had my 18th birthday at the Larchmont Tavern, and I had about 25 guys there, guys and girls. We'd all been drinking in there since we were about 16. I also had my bachelor party in 1971 at the Larchmont Tavern.
Right. So it's should we put up a plaque? Oh yeah, can't do that. Right. So just some other little tidbits that I remember as a kid in Larchmont was at Chatsworth Avenue School, the big playground was not paved. It was just dirt. And so the way the school system took care of maintaining the dust, they would bring a truck in and spray used motor oil on the thing. I think they did that maybe twice a year. And then, of course, after a couple of rainstorms, we were back to the dust again. So anyway, I think I've gone on long enough, and I have to leave some material for my brother. Jefferson.
Actually, I'm going to let Bubba go next. As a different perspective. Bubba, give a little background of yourself.
Sure. Little difference in age. I'm from the class of 77 from Mamaroneck High School. I think you guys are well on your way back then. Yeah. So my family came here in 1923 to start a business in the hair business. My grandfather was a hairstylist, and he actually ended up in Larchmont by falling asleep on a train and waking up in Larchmont, and he came up off the tracks, and sure enough, one of his old Italian friends had a little shop here and offered him a job. He came, he stayed, he loved it. For many years, we were at the old Harbor House on Palmer Avenue. That used to be called Parkside Beauty Salon. And he was there with my uncle, another Uncle Tony, and my father started there. And then there was a big fire in that building. They moved to Went Avenue. When my grandfather retired, it became M. Finelli Hair Design. I don't know if any of you ladies got your hair done with him, but that was, he thought he was quite the player at that time. Yes, there you go. And so he was there for a while. Then he moved over to Larchmont Avenue, where he retired, right next to Dale Hagen's. You guys remember Dale Hagen's? Yeah. Right next to that was his M. Finelli again. After the fire in Went Avenue, they moved to Larchmont Avenue. And retired in '86, I believe. Yeah, so a lot of fires back in Larchmont back then. And luckily we have some volunteers. So with that, so class of 77, grew up on Went Avenue, as we were stating earlier. That's where we sort of hung out. We played with the Whittemores and the Hines. Touch football, softball, all that stuff took place on the street. You left in the morning, you came back when the sun went down. My mother had a bell. You'd ring the bell. You knew it was time to sit down and eat. Yeah, absolutely. 6 o'clock whistle. Yeah, we were a little later. Depends. Yeah, remember the old fire whistle? Exactly. The old told you where the fires were. Right. That sign we had a little book. Yeah, we just found that sign. That's it's actually at the firehouse now. It tells you like 323 was, I think, Larchmont and Summit Avenue, and you'd hear the beeps, and that told the volunteers where to go. So that's how you knew where to go as a volunteer. Yeah, that was, I think, under the Feld administration that went away. Yeah. And so that sign was where everybody went, and the fire department was very social. But as you had stated earlier, I remember the oil on the field, and we used to come home. My mother used to say, "My God, what did you do?" We used to play soccer and cream the carrier, and always covered in mud and dirt. And back then, the school went to 6th grade, by the way. I don't know if you guys, of course, you remember that. Chatsworth was K through 6th. So you were BMOC, big man on campus, in 6th grade. And Homics had just come about back then. So my brother was the original class there. And I was just a few years in, and it was a great spot. And it was the first time you sort of mixed with other people from the other side of the tracks, Murray Avenue and Mamaroneck Avenue, and that sort of thing, which was great because that's where you sort of made some really good friends. And actually, my friends are still dear to me today. Those guys I met in elementary school and middle school. And in high school, so we started a group in 9th grade called the Ozonians. This is a little bit personal. So we're still very good friends to this day. We got together last week. Every first week of June, we go away and we go fly fishing, we go to Hamptons, we have a good time together. So, but in 1977, believe it or not, 40 years ago this week, I'll have some decaf, thank you. 40 years ago this week, we had an ozone streak. So remember when streaking was very popular in 77? It was like that was the thing to do. So at the time, that's what we did. So we had, in the Ozonians, sort of all of those guys were sort of the heads of the school, captain of the hockey team, captain of the football team. I was a GA president. My other friend was a vice president, Jeff King, and just very fun. So it became a big deal. The ozone joke became this whole thing that everybody wanted to show up for and be there, which took place in the field where the baseball field is now at the high school, in between, the two buildings there. There must have been 1,000 people outside there waiting to see us run naked on the field. So we meet at Richbell Road, we show up, we get dropped off, we run through the fence. It's very exciting, we're all nervous. But the thing that was fun about it was that when it was all over, I mean, even just the other day, I got something on Facebook that they commented that, wasn't it 40 years ago that you guys streaked? I'm like, yeah, it was 40 years ago, and that's how quickly the time has gone. But, so when that all ended, we got back in the car, and everybody was really excited. And the principal at the time was Dr. Tickton. Does that sound right? He replaced Mr. Downey. And he was like, fellas, whatever you do, please, no more ozone jokes. Right? That was great. You did it. It's done. Let's all move on. And actually, what happened was one more time, we ended up streaking the Board of Education breakfast the week later, which didn't go over well because my friend's father was on the board. And he was the only black guy, so you could tell who he was. So a little bit of trouble there from, his dad. Yeah, exactly, Mr. King. So those were great times, and that was, that was just a lot of fun then. And yeah, I mean, it was just great. Also, just, to chat a little bit about politics. I mean, back then, bike lanes didn't exist. Okay? There was no need to ride inside a 4-foot bike lane. We were free to ride. I had a Stingray, with a sissy bar and a fork in the front, like a sort of like a Harley Davidson kind of thing. I thought I was the coolest guy ever. And we used to hang out on Went Avenue with the Whittemores and the Hines, and everybody would fix up their bikes, because that's sort of what you did. You hung out, we sit in trees, and just passed the time. Yeah. We didn't drink yet. We drank later on.
You rode on the street, huh?
We rode on the street, absolutely, and just had great time. We did put baseball cards on the spokes, and I sort of had like a little muffler thing going on, like a motorcycle. But great fun and just really exciting. And the point is that these were your brothers. Those friends back then, those were who you hung out with. There was no telephones, there was no internet, obviously, no internet, nothing. The bond that you created, on somebody's front porch or on the stoop, that was what was all that really mattered to you back then. It didn't matter about anything else except being home in time for dinner. Because in my house, dinner was the meal of the day, and I always, still to this day, I tell my kids, once a day, you need to take the time and eat on linen. Just a tablecloth. This way you're really going to sit down, have a good conversation, and catch up with what's going on. And still to this day, we make sure, my wife does a good job making sure that at least once a day, maybe breakfast, that we sit down and we eat on linen. But great times, and let me see what else I got here. Oh, so my father would say, he came from the Bronx, he would say that the water in Larchmont was horrible. So he would make me go to, does anybody remember the Iceman on Weaver Street?
Yep.
So whenever he had a party, we'd have to go get bags of ice for a couple of bucks. We'd go get a big bag of ice and bring it back. And my Uncle Vic used to say, Mike, your martinis are the best in the world. What's the secret? He said, it's the ice. So even to this day now, that's one thing that's carried on with myself. I always make sure my kids go out and get me ice. They don't have to go. They don't have to go to the Iceman, but it's nice to have that. It's nice to have that little cocktail. That's about it. Oh, and everybody remember Collins Cove when it was a fish market? Mr. Bueller? Collins Cove was the fish market where you went to get fish. Nobody?
I do.
Do you?
It was the Koch family that lived on Yoakum that operated the fish market.
Well, I remember Mr. Bueller there, and my mother sending me up to get fish, which was,
Willie's Fish Market.
That was, they're related, I believe.
and that's all. Great times. You know, I'm so glad that we're here now to still enjoy that, to share this information with you guys. And I'm going to pass the microphone along. Thank you.
I forgot to mention one thing to you. Actually, I've got quite a few, but I'm only going to do one. Going back to the 60s, there was an organization which Bruce belonged to and I was president of at a time, called the Mamaroneck Larchmont JCs. That's a junior chamber of commerce. At the time, it was a young men's service organization of young men between the ages of 18 and 36. It's now men and women, and it's about 2 million members around the United States. And they're across from the Washington Arms, where the apartment buildings are now, was an empty lot. I don't know if any of you remember, it goes way back, but the JCs, among doing thousands of things in the community, sold Christmas trees. And we sold Christmas trees and did scholarships at Mamaroneck High School. And I'm talking about 1966, 67, 68. We were giving about $3,000 a year from just making that money on Christmas trees. $3,000 a year would put a kid through a very good school for an entire year, which is absolutely amazing. You could go to Westchester Community College for probably $270 a semester, which is amazing. But I wanted to mention that to you because I'm a senator in the JCs now and have been a lifetime senator for a long time.
But you're not 36.
Yeah, not 36 anymore. I'm more than twice 36, so it's getting on. But I wanted to mention that to you because that was my first getting into service of our community. And the JCs are all over the United States, and they're young people who give back to their communities, and it's a wonderful organization, and it was very strong here. We had about 50 members, and we met in the room behind the Larchmont Federal Savings and Loan. There was a room behind there. I don't know if any of you remember where the Larchmont Federal Savings and Loan was. Bill Massey was the president, and Elliot Howard, who I went to Mamaroneck High School with, would become president after Bill. But I'll pass this back to Jeff. Thank you. He still lives here.
Yeah.
Elliot still lives here.
And his wife died about a year or so ago. Arlene, yeah. There's just a couple of things. Bubba talked about the Whittemores. It's not Jim Whittemore, Bill Whittemore, and so on. It was Mal Whittemore, and who lived on Went, and his widow just sold her house, and but Mal had a distinction of being. He was a local fireman, a volunteer, but he had the distinction of being Ted Turner's crew all throughout Brown. When Ted was college sailor of the year and so on, Mal Whittemore was his crew. And I used to see him and remind him of that. So nobody else knew that. But, you know, Larchmont growing up, I believe, was a lot more middle class when we were kids. And it was still a third, as it is today. A third Protestant, a third Catholic, and a third Jewish. But we had many more local businesses that were operated by residents. I mean, some of them have been mentioned already, the Futtermans and Gil Merrill with Merrill's Hardware. Gil was on the board of Larchmont Federal. A lot of the local folks, Pine, X-Ray, Warner Pine, Koch's Willie's Fish Market. The Koch family lived on Yoakum. And by the way, how many of you can go down Beach Avenue and name each street in a row. I mean, it is really difficult to remember, you know, whether Willow comes before Elm, becomes before Woodbine, Chestnut, all of that. Eckwow. Elm, Chestnut, Willow, Oak, Woodbine. And then you get down to the bottom of the hill where Bruce and I lived. You would sleigh ride down to the hill into our garage at Hazel Lane. So remember Eckwow. So the Koch's Fish Market, we had Larchmont Print, which was operated for many years by a classmate of mine at Chatsworth, Dickie Donofrio, who never went anywhere except for that block for like 40 years. The Cardaceous family used to live in an apartment above where the Music Academy, next door to the Music Academy, and his father and uncle, James and Nicholas, operated a flower shop across from the post office. Johnny Cardaceous was a classmate of mine at Chatsworth, one of the best athletes I've ever known in my life. Brodersons, remember Brodersons? Fardermans, and Larchmont Federal, which had all sorts of local people working for it. The mayors at the time, my growing up, by the way, my first residence, I'd be happy to say, I lived in the gingerbread house. Yeah. I don't remember a thing because I was 1 year old and my parents rented it. And then we went over to live in our grandfather's house on Rockwood and Shadow Lane, which I hate to drive by because they're now, on Shadow Lane was the backyard, now there are two houses there. And if you go into that big room, underneath the mantle, my uncle Gordon carved his initials. Oh yeah, the bomb shelter. So, and it was built in the 20s and it had central vacuum cleaning in the 20s. So the mayors at the time, I'm going back to starting with 1946, E. Spencer Greason, and the Greason family is still around here. The kids and hockey and so on. The next mayor was Joe Gagliardi. And the Gagliardi family lived on Larchmont Avenue between the Post Road and Palmer, where the two lions sit. And Joe Gag went on to become the Westchester DA and then a Supreme Court judge, and his brother Lee became a federal judge, quite a family. G. Crawford Eddy, who was a buddy of my parents. John B. Coffinberry was a mayor, and had Nadine, his daughter, was a good friend of our sister. She was also gorgeous. I mean, I looked up at her. And then what came next, and I mentioned this to Jane Eney, was the first Democratic mayor of the village of Larchmont, and that was Edward F.X. Ryan, Francis Xavier, and he had a law office above where Houlihan's is now. And I tried to get Kevin Ryan to speak, but he's off at some wedding in Europe as well, you know. And which brings me to the fact that the houses in Larchmont were not what they are today. And a lot of those big Victorians were large Catholic families. And I mean, if you were at a Catholic family and you only had 6 or 7 kids, you were small. And there was one family that had 14 kids. And the Learys. And in the attic, yeah, the house that he just sold, yeah. And I remember a story where in the attic they had a series of drawers built into the eaves, and so each kid had a color. And so all the socks were the same color, and all the underwear was the same color. So, you know, red went in this drawer, and green went in that drawer, and so on. So it was a different world. There was, in my lifetime, there was hardly a time when there was not a Keresy in the police department. And the last one being Billy Keresy, who was a little younger than I was, but he was a hell of an athlete. We went around playing basketball wherever we could. Bruce mentioned Doc Hughes. Charlie's Sport Shop. You know? supplied skates down below. I mean, what an idea. You needed skates as your kids grew older. You went down to the basement of Charlie's, and Charlie stood out there in front of his store. He had a little weight on, but he was a character. Bowling. Bowling, okay? Where could you bowl? Wait, I got so many voices here. Where? All right, there were two places. Well, actually, Larchmont Shore Club has bowling alleys too. But the two major areas to bowl were Loyal Inn and Grosso's, which was upstairs on Palmer Avenue above the ice cream shop. And I used to earn pin money up there because in those days, you set the pins. Yeah, we got either money or free games. And the Loyal Inn, I remember as a kid, my room was on a corner and one window faced towards New Rochelle. And one day I remember the sky was bright orange and it was the actual Loyal Inn burning. And it was one of our huge hotels along here. And it burned down, and in its place was the Loyal Inn bowling alley. And that's why it was called Loyal Inn.
There was another bowling alley
Where was that?
on the corner of Depot Way and Palmer Avenue.
Oh, that's right. That's right. There's a third one. Yeah. Chatsworth School, my brother stole my thunder with the oil truck going up and down there. But we used to get to school early and play pickup baseball. And I told my son, I never had a zebra. I don't know if you know what I mean by a zebra, until I was in the 9th grade and joined the Mamaroneck junior high football team. And a zebra means a referee or an umpire. We never had Little League, soccer, all of that stuff. We had pickup games, and you traveled around. We had a group that went, oh, somebody's got a basketball court up in da-da-da-da, and we traveled up there. We organized a football game on 5th Avenue against New Rochelle. Now, talk to me about being scary. A bunch of kids from Larchmont Village playing football against New Rochelle. The other big thing was the Post Road. When we grew up, there was no 95. All of the trucks were on the Post Road, and yet didn't hinder us from riding our bikes all over the place. Can you imagine what the traffic would be like today if 95 weren't there? And 95 was built in the 50s, from let's say 54 to 57 and so on. And before it was finished, there were a number of fellows in my class who used to sneak onto the thruway before it opened, and race cars. They used to race up and down the thruway because it wasn't open, there was no traffic, but that section was finished. Yeah, one of those. There you go. The bus routes. You know, the bus came all the way down into the manor and turned right on Cedar. And that was also the trolley route. And the buses today still follow the trolley route. And when I was a kid, you could still see the steel trolley rails. Okay, you know, when instead of potholes, we had rail holes. We also had real estate brokers who were. We never had any chains like Houlihan or Coldwell Banker and so on. We had local brokers that were really kind of well-known, powerful. Thanks, Bubba. We had Merritt Associates in that stone building across from Tequila Sunrise. And Mabel Mitchell was an absolute institution, and God help you if you crossed her. Yeah, she was actually, Mabel was in our parents' wedding as a bridesmaid, and my mother was a bridesmaid in Mabel Mitchell's wedding. And her brother, Johnny Merritt, became a well-known builder, built the Rye Ridge Shopping Center and other big things, and was also one of the first people who was involved in building Elkin Park, which was for local GIs. And so, which reminds me, back at Chatsworth School, by the way, Bruce was in his first class, but I noticed in yesterday's obituary, Walter Coop died. And he was, it says here, he was the first male elementary school teacher in the Mamaroneck School District. And Bruce was in his first class. So back to the brokers, we had O&A Mandeville, Mandy, who was also a supervisor in the town of Mamaroneck. And he was another tough cookie. Yeah, he was a crook. He controlled Chatsworth Gardens, and a lot of people downsized by selling their house and going to Chatsworth Gardens. But you couldn't get into Chatsworth Gardens unless you listed your house with Mandy. So he was a real character, had an office on the Post Road towards New Rochelle. Thomas B. Sutton, which morphed into Sutton and Whittemore, which morphed into Burbank Whittemore, and that's where Emmy Lou and Jim Whittemore wound up as partners, and that building is now being sold. And it was interesting, Tom Sutton got a variance. That strip of land was zoned for multiple dwellings, and the people on Manor Place were worried that the apartment house was going to be built there. So they all came and supported a variance for Tom Sutton to put his office there, because it was a house that was transported from Rockland Avenue down there, and then he put an addition on. So that's why it has remained all of these years, and it's a great place. The Severin brothers, which had a little place as you go down into Larchmont train station, that little building there, and they added a lot to the local flavor, both in drawings and poems, and they added a lot to the life of Larchmont. Bob Plout was another guy that near Emmy Lou, and I remember going into Emmy Lou's, and her mother, Mrs. DeVoe, would be sitting there telling Emmy Lou what to do. Can you imagine that, telling Emmy Lou what to do? So, and also back to the Bevan, I got a few minutes. I got this email from Jim Whittemore, and he says, "Where do I start?" It was actually called the Pleasure Bay Bar. That was the nickname. The trees outside the bar are the tallest in the manor and maybe in North America. When you have roughly 100 guys a night peeing on the trees at 3 in the morning, you would expect growth more than other areas of the town. As long as one person stayed in the hotel, the Bevan Hotel, they could legally run the bar below. Many friends I know registered as patrons, and the bar continued into the months and evenings. I was a bartender there in summer of 1967, and my first service of a drink was to Peter Schmergy from the Schmergy family in Oriana. The thing I remember about Larchmont at the time, and Bubba mentioned it was the freedom. We went everywhere, and nobody said a word, as long as you had the dime in your pocket if you could find a payphone, but they were all over the place, and you could ride your bikes everywhere, and as long as you were home for dinner, there was no problem. I remember one of the things, just to give you an example, at Larchmont Yacht Club and sailing class, when they had lousy days and no wind and so on, one of the games they played with maybe 80 kids was Hare and Hound. And they divided the sailing class up in half, and they were sent out, and the object was to try to get back into the bicycle circle at the yacht club without being tagged. And the other half went out and tried to find the people to tag them. The boundaries were Long Island Sound, Premium River, the Post Road, and the outer edge of Flint Park. Can you imagine? 80 kids today running through. I mean, the police department would be called. There would be hell to pay. Premium River was an actual river at the time. It was not mud. And that's where everybody in the manor went to ice skate during the winter. And Red Bridge, which to my memory was never ever red. And that's because the mill was red that was down the way. And they put the bridge in to get to the mill, and then built the underwater dam going into Echo Bay so that it always had water in it. So that's my story. It was a bucolic place to grow up in. The houses were essentially the same. There weren't very many new houses. There weren't many big tracts to break up. The only tract I remember, and my father used to talk about it, was the Shinazi estate across the street, where on Larchmont Avenue, where you see the white marble wall. That was the Shinazi estate. And so that's why you see what we would call new houses. I mean, they were built there in probably the late 40s, early 50s, but that was the Shinazi. So you didn't have a lot of land breakup, and the houses were the same. Anything else, guys?
I just want to thank all of you for being here, and also tell you that every one of you and all the summit members, I see about half of you here today, they really care about Larchmont, don't they? You all give back to your community in many and various ways. The JC Creed, the last paragraph of it, says that service to humanity is the best work of life. And you are all living proof of that through orderly organizations that you belong to and everything you do for other people. And I just want you to know that you have my heartfelt thanks. Thank you.
I want to thank everybody. By the way, there's another bar that was a little later than us. PK's, which was Peter Kane, whose father was a supervisor in the town of Mamaroneck and Kane Avenue and old family. But PK's was, and Paul Cunningham and Bill Dratty bought most of these places, the LT and Gus's and Carl's. And Chaucer's, yeah. And the other thing, when I was a kid, Abe Levine's. Thank you very much. And so all the kids went to the Bevan and so on, and the adult place to go was Abe Levine's on Palmer Avenue. Anyhow, thank you for my third in a series of about local community. I think it's very important to know where we came from and how it got here and how it may be in the future.
I just want to say that on Shadow Lane, down the street from where his house is a little pink house in which two school teachers lived, but that was where James Reston lived when he got married. If you've ever read James Reston's book, that's where he lived when he got married.
Yeah. Right. And actually, that was part of my grandfather's property.
Oh, really?
Yes. And he rented it out to the school teachers. And by the way, one of the best places for teenagers to hang out, in a good way, other than the Bevan and so on. And by the way, when it was drinking age, it was 18. That's how we got to know a lot of the people from Connecticut. But one of the best places to hang out, the one place that did a lot for teenagers, was the basement of Larchmont Avenue Church. They had a lot of stuff, and they sort of joined up the elementary school kids and junior high school kids. Who?
Palmer Avenue. Did it go through when you were a kid?
Yes, it did. But if you look on the old maps, you're right. It didn't go down into New Rochelle. It just curved back in. Yeah, Palmer Avenue.
And they built that extension when they tore down Bender's, or moved Bender's lumber up against the railroad tracks, because you had to sort of like weave your way around in there, make a right and then a left.
Yeah. Say that again.
Yes, so the end of Palmer Avenue down there toward New Rochelle, where that big Stop and Shop is, that was all done back in the in those days, an urban renewal project, where that was kind of a rundown section of New Rochelle, down where the Toyota dealer is, and they knocked down all of the houses in there to put in commercial properties, and then they redid Palmer Avenue, because Palmer Avenue used to make a like a right-hand turn where actually there's still a street there where Samarco's is, and the Raphael Diner manufacturing operation. So that was the original path of Palmer.
Okay, thanks very much, and see you next September. Then you want to say something about that? Questions, okay. Yes?
Okay. I grew up in Binghamton, New York, which is a lot farther away than Mamaroneck is from Larchmont.
I'd say.
A couple things you said that caught my curiosity. One of them is, somebody mentioned playing soccer on the playground.
Not me.
That's what.
Yeah, he was a younger guy than me.
When I grew up in Binghamton in the 50s, we never even heard of soccer.
He wasn't in the 50s. He's a young guy.
He's a young guy.
Okay, maybe it would have.
That's the difference.
Maybe it would have come in by then. Okay. Secondly, I know you were 18 when you were going to the bars. How did all those 16-year-olds get served?
By the 18-year-olds. By Jim Whittemore, when he was 18, he used to serve the 16-year-olds.
I shouldn't admit this to you, John. I shouldn't admit this to you, but in those days, you filled out your own driver's license and it got stamped on the left-hand corner. And as all you did was fold it up. You put in your whatever age you wanted. You folded it up and you put it in your wallet. And you walked in and you showed the bartender your wallet like that, and he said, "Oh, okay," and that's how you got served. And I looked like I was 10, by the way. Is that too much information?
Third one. In Binghamton, when I was growing up, we're talking about 50s into the 60s. We were a very diverse community, but in the high school, every ethnic group had their own fraternity. We had fraternities in high school, but every ethnic group had their own identified group. And I used to fight with each other. The Italians fought with the Jews.
See, we were lovers, not fighters, John. I'm sorry. No, the only chasing that went on was the boys chasing the girls into Robarts.
There you go.
There you go. Another question?
No, it's just an answer to Doc's question. What you, I guess, in Binghamton, New York, was different from Mamaroneck and Larchmont, New York, is that we were so close to the city. And as a result, believe it or not, the organized sports, as Jeff indicated, when it comes to the zebra, or what's called official refereeing, but all kids played soccer. And because being from Mamaroneck Avenue School, we had a large Italian. The Irish played soccer. It was the world sport. And remember, back then, world. So as a result of that, it was all good. Now, to be politically incorrect, because of our sporting, believe it or not, they used to have what was called victory parties. Now, you can't have it today, but kids were a little bit more responsible. The adults were upstairs, the kids were downstairs. If we won the big game, especially the Mamaroneck-Portchester game or whatever, there was a victory party. And the alcohol was flowing because at the age of 16, there was a kind of gray line that if you didn't abuse it, the police didn't hurt you.
That's absolutely correct. That's how we got in the LT at 16. That's why I had my birthday party there at 18. And the bartender asked me how old I was. I told him the truth, and he went, "Oh my God, you've been drinking here for 2 years?" I said, "No." I said, "I'm sorry. By the way, I don't drink anymore. Maybe that's why."
I only brought it up because like the kids in my classes at Berkshire were always yelling, "All these immigrants are using fake IDs." And I would offer, "What did you do when you were 16?
John?
When I lived here in the 80s, I was told that the LT was a male-only bar until some point in the 60s when there was a protest by women who wanted to be admitted and when they got in, they wondered why. Is that true? or
No.
something-
No,
real estate
first of all, that's not true. But the LT when we were growing up was about half the size that it is today, because the Brunos finally bought the cleaners next door to the LT and expanded it, and have the place way to the left of where all the seats and stuff are to have parties and things.
It was Park Radio and TV when they bought it. It wasn't a.
Oh, it wasn't the cleaner, it was Park Radio? Yeah, I thought Palmer. I thought, and didn't the guy who owned Park Radio used to take us. He used to take us skating. Remember, Ray Faiola? Yeah, yeah. Any other questions?
Another guy with a hairline like mine.
Thank you all.
I want to thank you all for coming. It's a smaller group because June is a hard month, unfortunately. A lot of people leave or go away. But I thank the loyal band that has come. We take a hiatus over the summer, and we'll see you back in September. Have a wonderful summer, everybody. Thank you for coming. And thank you for the panel, for all the reminiscences. We really appreciate it. Thank you.